Hello, and a very good morning, good evening, or good night to all of you, and thanks for joining us online for this edition of the SDG Local Solutions Series organized by UNDP, the United Nations Development Program. I'm Diana Lopez. I'm an advisor on cities and local government at headquarters of UNDP here in New York, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this session on how cities are accessing carbon markets. The objective of this series is to demonstrate how local governments and cities are making Agenda 2030 a reality for all and everywhere, and how through specific solutions, through SDG local action, they are really making this global agenda something that the citizens can see and experience in their daily lives and in their streets. Some logistics first. So first of all, we have interpretation. For accessing the interpretation, you need to click on the small button with the little word that says interpretation on the bottom of your screens. Without further ado, just a note on the YouTube recording. So this webinar is not broadcasted, but we record it and then we will edit it and upload it in our YouTube channel that we will share in the chat. The chat is the main channel for communication on this webinar. You can please introduce yourself, make questions for the panelists, or share resources, links, anything that you want to share with the group. Please use the chat. So then allow me to introduce our moderator today, Gabriel Labate. Thank you very much for being with us today. Gabriel is the head of Climate Migration Unit in the United Nations Environmental Program, our sister agency in Nairobi. And we have two speakers from one city and one regional government that are really accessing the carbon markets. And we're very excited to know how, because the idea of these webinars is to really go to the solution level and understand how local governments are really doing things and experimenting with innovation. On the side of Freetown, we have Aja Binta Jalloh with us. Welcome, Binta. She's the marketing manager of the Freetown program, who is led by the Freetown City Council in Sierra Leone. And also we have with us Marcos Mariano Cena Ruiz, who is the environmental safety engineer at the Córdoba province in Argentina. So with this introduction, please remember to use the chat, and over to you, Gabriel. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure being here with you. My name is Gabriel Labate. I'm the head of the Climate Mitigation Unit at the UN Environment Program. I'm also the co-chair of the expert panel of an organization called the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Markets. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks so much to the UN Development Program, our sister agency, for organizing this webinar, which actually touches upon a very important topic. And I would highlight two main reasons for that. First is the growing importance of cities. The global share of population is now about 55%. There are differences among regions. Africa is about 45%, but Latin America and the Caribbean is about 80%. And the estimation is that the world will converge towards something between 70 and 80% of the global population living in cities by 2050. So if you are in Latin America at the moment and you are watching this webinar, chances are most probably that you are doing that from a city. And if you are in Africa, well, it's it's half and half. So cities already play an important role. Cities have a very important carbon footprint, and we should expect this footprint to improve significantly in the next 25 years. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, it's what in UNEP we called the emission gap. And the emission gap, quickly defined, is the amount of emission reductions we need to undertake if we want to be, for example, within 2 degrees, below 2 degrees, or if you want to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement, which was to be significantly below 2 degrees, and people put that in 1.5. And the gap is massive. In order, I mean, just to give you an idea, if in order to be on a pathway to around 2 degrees of climate change, by 2030, the international community should be decreasing emissions by something that is equivalent to twice the emissions of the United States. So think about that. We are already doing a number of things to decrease emissions. All of us are making an effort. If we want to be within 2 degrees, in addition to what we are doing, we should cut down emissions globally by twice those of the United States. If you like numbers, that number is about 12 gigatons. If the world would like to be around 1.5, that increases significantly, it actually doubles. And that means, in relative terms, cutting down twice the emissions of China. So this is a significant challenge that is ahead of us. Now, this transition will happen. All the signals is that it's not whether we are moving towards a world of net zero. The question is how fast that transition will take place and whether we will be able to avoid the worst impact of climate change. But in doing that, something that it's important to keep in mind is that we need to pay for emission reductions. The transition to a net zero world will not be cost-free. It will cost us money. True, we will all be better off once we get there, but between where we are and that net zero world, that transition will cost money. And that's the third topic why this initiative by UNDP is a very important one, because carbon markets, of course, in combination with other tools, will have a major role to play. Carbon markets will probably increase significantly in the next 2 years. Some estimates put it at about at least $10 billion in transactions by 2030. That's maybe 6 years from now. That's the floor. Other estimates are putting the volume of the market at $50 billion a year in 6-year time. So carbon markets can have, as I said, a major role in financing this transition. The emission gap that I was mentioning is massive, and we need to use all tools at our disposal. We need the whole toolbox. And to close this intervention, the main message I would leave with you is that we live basically in a world of everything, everywhere, all at once, if you remember the movie. So we need to use every tool we have. In all places we can use them, and all together now. With that, I would like to pass the floor to Binta. That will, floor is all yours.
Many thanks, Gabriel and Diana. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and for that brief overview, Gabriel. My name is Haja Binta Jallow. I go by Binta, and as I have been rightly introduced, I am the ESG marketing manager for the Freetown, the Treetown program. Okay, so I will be sharing Freetown's experience in how we're accessing or planning to access the carbon market using our nature-based solution, which is a Freetown tree planting program. So to start with, first of all, this is Freetown. It is a very beautiful city, a lively one, of course, with very beautiful landscapes, beaches, very friendly people. We've got like some rich cultural heritage and historic landmarks. We have one of the oldest universities in West Africa. And we also provide opportunities in various sectors, legal, business, and diplomatic domains. However, Freetown, just like many other cities, especially in the midst of climate change, does faces some sort of challenges. So our city, Freetown, of course, which is in the western area, urban, and located on a mountainous peninsula, is currently home to about 1.2 million residents, with over 12,000 inhabitants that live within per kilometer square. So because of this, Freetown is actually seen as one of the most densely populated cities in West Africa. And over the past 50 years, Freetown's population has increased like tenfold. And this is mainly caused by uncontrolled urban expansion, like rural urban migration, and lots of other things that are beyond our control, like some climate-related risk. However, added to this population growth, we see that Freetown's forest cover on the Western Area Peninsula has declined about 70%. And this has resulted in so many other climate-induced risks like heat stress, disaster risk, water challenges, air pollution, and all that. In terms of like climate risk, especially disaster risk, we face extreme cases of climate-related risk. We do have high floodings that take a toll on us in some years. So for example, in 2017, we had a severe flooding that led to a mudslide where over 1,000 people were affected. Some lost their lives, some are still reported missing. We face challenges with water shortages. We have the Goma Dam, which is responsible to supply the majority of Freetown's water. But because of the increase in population, this facility has been strained. It was designed to cater for about 300,000 residents. But now with a population of over 1 million, that facility is obviously strained with providing just minimal water to Freetown's residents. Some receive water like once a week, some do not receive at all. And this hazard we see mostly affecting vulnerable communities that live in the hillside or the coastal areas, especially those living in the slum communities. So because of these challenges, we had to make a case for climate action in Freetown. So we had to work towards addressing these challenges. And so in 2019, our city, Freetown, joined the C40's Climate Action Leadership Group and committed to delivering on its highest ambition to the Paris Agreement. And the result of that commitment is the development of a climate action strategy, which is a document that is rich in evidence-based solutions that we use to guide the city in terms of how to adapt to climatic-related risk, as well as enhancing some mitigation efforts and ensure that the city works towards a greener and more sustainable future. So within the climate action strategy, this is where comes in the Freetown, the Treetown program, which is a flagship adaptation strategy, a nature-based solution that was launched in early 2020, and that forms the foundation of our natural capital investment strategy. So working with the city's climate especially the most vulnerable communities, the Freetown City Council co-designed the Freetown Nutrition Program, which was set to plant and digital track 1 million trees by 2022. And that timeline has now been expanded to 2024 by the end of this year, with the aim of reforesting 1 million, about 5,000 hectares of land by 2030, and sequestering about 100,000 tons of CO2, reducing loss of lives, livelihood, and properties from catastrophic events, as well as protecting our water catchment areas by 100% and ensuring that we have like a reduced water shortages about 50%. So far, so good. These are our achievements. So we've planted over 970,000 trees, covering 13 wards. 3 community water sources have been covered, about 34 websites covered, created about 88% of jobs for youths within about 1,500 direct and indirect green jobs. And 40% of these jobs are actually occupied by women. So we want to ensure there is sustainability in terms of financing. So the Freetown Reforestation Project actually focuses on sustainability by creating a financing model that attracts investments from both carbon and non-carbon markets. So we actually got a support from the Bloomberg Philanthropist, where our city was one of the recipients of the Global Mayor's Challenge. And that fund is supporting us towards registering and getting access to the carbon market. But however, our process involves community members of CBOs, we usually call them community-based organizations. We ensure that they're involved in every step of this process, which means from planting to maintaining trees, which aims at ensuring that there's about 80% survival rate. So we also ensure that we use a web-based platform that has a tree tracker app where residents within these communities actually go and plant these trees and ensure that they are being maintained and taken care of, and track these trees and record all the detail in the web platform. So now the city plans to use these methods to create like some sort of like a tokenized system wherein we value these trees based on their various characteristics and their carbon sequestration potential. And the city plans to trade these credits, which we hope would boost the future reforestation efforts and adaptation project. We plan to expand to about 5 million trees by 2030. However, obviously this will require sustainable financing. And therefore, to achieve this, that's why we're developing a municipal carbon offset strategies to sell the credits that will be generated from the 1 million trees that would be planted up to 2024, this year now. And we believe that this strategy is going to be designed to attract investments from both voluntary carbon markets, wherein we're targeting corporate and institutional investors, as well as those that would be impact focused, looking maybe to fulfill their corporate social responsibility goals. We believe that this approach obviously will create a self-sustaining financing model that will support further tree planting and also fund other climate adaptation goals that are embedded within our climate action strategy. So we plan to scale up. So these are the processes we've started with, where we are at the moment, and where we plan to go in the future. So in phase 1, we've already planted about 977,000 trees. We'll be surpassing our targets by the end of this year, where we're actually planting now about 300,000 trees. And phase 2, we plan to scale up the project, where we plan to plant more trees, about 5 to 7 million, and also focusing on the blue economy, where we plan to restore mangroves. And by phase 3, we intend to do an additional 15 million trees, which will take us all the way to 2050. And this, we believe, that will help us address especially some of our climatic conditions in terms of risk of floods and landslide, coastal erosion, urban heat stress, increasing our carbon sequestration potential, but also create some economic value in terms of job creation and address other areas in terms of water supply and improve air quality. And of course, these are impact focused, like I mentioned earlier, in terms of heat stress reduction, creating more jobs, and also ensure that all what we're doing lies in place of what the Sustainable Development Goals tied to. We're also planning to replicate Freetown the Treetown model. So we believe that the model is highly replicable to climate vulnerable cities in Africa and beyond. And these cities can be, we believe they can be Treetown. So we're extensively engaging other cities. We are currently having engagements now with Tshwane City in South Africa, and we've had some engagements with other cities like Addis Ababa, Nairobi, Dhaka, etc. So that's just a brief rundown about projects or Freetown the Treetown program. Thank you so much, everyone. So please feel free to ask your questions. I'll be here. Thank you.
Binta, thank you so much. Terrific presentation and an initiative. I remind the public that we have a chat. You have a chat at the bottom of your screen, and that you can put your questions there. We will compile questions and have at the end of the webinar a section to go over them. But I would like to give, before we continue into the next section of the webinar, I would like to give the floor to Marcos to ask a question on Binta's presentation. Marcos, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Gabriel. Binta, I would like to know about the methodologies you use to determine the carbon sequestration and offsets generation, and if you are focused in a particular carbon market.
Okay, thank you so much, Marcus. So at the moment, we're in the process of onboarding a carbon developer. They're currently ongoing in a process called, they're called First Climate. They will work with us together in developing a feasibility study, a business case, and a PDD, right all the way to registration. The outcome from that feasibility would actually finalize what registration methodologies we would look into. But from initial research so far, we are looking at various methodologies, as it kind of looks at both terrestrial and mangroves restoration, and also the fact that we are also planning not just mangroves, but also restoring shrubs, which the gold standard may not look into in terms of like shrubs. They cover mangroves actually. So maybe the VERA registry might be one we'll look into based on the research we've gathered so far. And also because we understand that VERA's methodology might be a bit flexible in our case. So we're doing an urban reforestation project, which means it's sort of a bit complex in terms of like where we access land spaces to plants. So most of our trees are planted in sparsely places, some in backyards and all that. So because we understand that VERA could be a better option in terms of using sensors-based quantification of our trees where each tree can be counted. Perhaps we might be going with VERA, but all of those would be left with the work of the carbon developer when we work together in developing the feasibility study and understand exactly what works for us. But so far, so good. We've done an initial feasibility, a pre-feasibility with the International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD. They did a report on an integrated cost-benefit analysis using a survey model, which shows that, of course, we have like high benefits in terms of economic, environment, and social gains from avoided costs due to reduced climate risk. And so we'll look into that in terms of when the carbon developer comes to know exactly what options would look like and what the sequestration potential will look like. But based on the reports we've got from Savi and research we've done with other folks, we believe that at least if we can get the 500,000 trees into the market, we'll have about 100 1,000 tons of carbon to be sequestered. And the more we expand, say maybe by 2050 with the 20 million trees, we would have about 500,000 tons. So as I mentioned earlier, we're about to bring in a carbon developer that will help us go through those processes in detail.
Thank you, Binta. And just as a comment, the credits from coming from carbon capture and in a sense what Freetown is doing is carbon removals actually are fetching the best prices in the market. They are fetching prices above those of emission reductions, for example, come from forest conservation or renewable energy. So if you manage to ensure buyers, good quality of those credits, it's you have good chances of fetching a good price. With that, I would like to change the angle of the conversation and give the floor to Marcos, who will share with us an experience from the city of Córdoba in Argentina on the use of compensation and carbon markets. Marcos, the floor is all yours.
Bueno, en primera instancia.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity of showing to the world what's happening in our province. The province of Córdoba, it's in the center of our country, Argentina. Its mainly characteristic is it's a province that is very powerful. It's the second one when it comes to economic level in the national landscape of our country in Argentina, and it has a very important potential when it comes to bioenergies, alternative energies, and everything related to the agricultural and cattle industry. Nearly 70% of our territory is for agriculture and for cattle. Our lands are very fertile and with a lot of room for improvements. In our country, we have the Patagonia. It's with its winds and the potential of wind power energy, it's huge, or the lithium, maybe when it comes to the northern mountains, or the solar energy, photovoltaic energy. So our main characteristic is basically to try to develop markets in this region. So we decided to involve ourselves after studying many cases and analyzing the potential in how could we capitalize or to make money from our region with projects that due to their size or scale could not access to international markets. So we introduced this challenge on how we generated the demand and how we generated the offer. So we encountered certain projects of biogas or photovoltaic projects that they mainly generated electricity and they sold those assets, but they could not capitalize through other ways, like, for example, the offset emissions or the carbon emissions, all of those things. And I want to keep one word that Gabriel said, which is basically this critical mass of tiny projects that are going to make a difference, is to use every tool that we have in every specific place where we can develop the tool. This is going to be the difference at a global level and not only thinking about huge projects. So with this challenge, basically we started working in a pilot experience of capitalizing these environmental assets. So based on this analysis, we get this pilot experience of avoided or offset carbon emissions tender. So through this program that it was analyzed in the past, we worked on the offers. So which products could be chosen or eligible to transform them into credit assets that generate among the province territory carbon credits? So we started the distributed photovoltaic generation facilities, which is a pretty new concept in which Cordoba is a pioneer in its activities, in which the user that consumes electric energy has just not a passive role, but an active role where they generate their own electric energy, and eventually this electric energy, that it's unused, they can capitalize it through a benefit. So there's another action, which is a community distributed generation, in which you cluster all of the generators in a remote area in the consumption points, and the facilities are, or the installations are, in a remote area where we can have, for example, a solar park. And this community distributed generation has benefits from each partner, let's say, that integrates the solution. This was capitalized. It was just considered through self-consumption methodologies, mainly a community one, because the home projects or individual projects were very tiny. Then we analyzed biogas generation projects, mainly in the use of the waste from cattle, for example, to generate this biogas and capture methane. Its conversion to a manure that's has less emissions. Then biodiesel producers for self-consumption. In Argentina, we have legislation in which the consumption is regulated, but for this company that they generated their own bio fuel and they consume them, we could measure this emissions. Also, industries that accessed to natural gas to replace high carbon intensity fossil fuels. So these fossil fuels referred to bio oils, wood, other kind of fuels, high carbon in general. So basically we quantified the offset emissions for the replacement of these new fuels, and also companies with energy management systems. So the reduction of this certified energy consumption, they could capitalize those spare ones. But we had to generate the demand. So who were going to be among the province, the companies, or the organizations that were going to acquire these offsets if they need them? So among the Ministry of Public Services and Infrastructures, there's different public works with certain suppliers. So these suppliers or these companies, they had the obligation among the projects, they had to offset the emissions through this structure. So in addition to this, we included different organizations, like, for example, the Ministry of Public Services. For example, the company generates and supplies energy to the province, ESPEC, its name. Or, for example, the private entities like football clubs or other organizations that wanted to participate to give some visibility to this. And also the public workers or public officials with a hierarchical level, they also had to access to the offset of their emissions for their different commutings, depending if they moved in car, aircraft. And when it comes to the compensators or offsetters, among the conditions in the tender specification, you had to calculate the carbon footprint through this tender processes. and this somehow gave some advantages to the choosing or election processes for assigning the work or assigning the contract. Among parameters that are somehow among the 1 to 3% of the process at a level price, they had a bigger preference or lower preference according if they had this offset compensations, or if they had calculated their offsets. They had a better score if they had calculated their carbon footprint after each work. So they had these competitive advantages. In the case of the public officials, they received a resolution from the ministry, and they were compelled to have these emissions offset. This was conducted through a committee which was formed by universities, different public, private entities on the province. And this committee, what they did was to determine adapted methodologies, also the eligibility conditions of each project that was presented to this tender. And from each report, they showed the offsets for the following tenders. So in this case, the airplane emissions were also considered for the public officials. And once they determined each verified carbon unit, this generated a token that later, once all of the tender project was activated, this was stored in a blockchain in a platform, which is Blockchain. It's a platform that the province had an access to, and it comes from the Inter-American Bank of Development. And they basically developed this kind of platforms to ease or improve the conditions for Latin America and the Caribbean. Later, we determined two tenders. One was in the year 2022 in November, and the other one in November 2023, in which all of the verified carbon units were available for the individuals, and then the users with a password, they could access to this tender platform, and to the highest bidder and the better prices, they started acquiring all of these carbon units that were verified, and they had to incorporate in the processes or strategies or sustainability reports. They have to include this to be able to access later to future tenders with these competitive advantages. So each verified unit of carbon was an equivalent to 1 ton of carbon. And once the tender was closed, we issued the offset carbon certifications in accordance to which its compensator or offsetter had acquired. This is more or less the process, as I mentioned before. Through this validating committee, we validated this carbon, verified carbon units, then through the blockchain, then digital tender, and then all of this process of compensation and obtention of the certificates of carbon displaced certificates. So these were the certifications given. Each of these certifications were stored in the blockchain, and any person, basically the special thing about this is that any person or any company or even the government, if they wanted to verify the traceability, they could access to this blockchain platform with a number and a code that in Argentina is called QUID, which is the distributing unique or single code, and they could access there and see the validity and trustability of each of this data. In the last case of the tender or the auction, we had 196 participants between the people that offered and the people that were the offsetters or compensators. So 69 public works contracting companies, 72 public officials, 22 private organizations or entities as compensators, 52 distributed generation projects, 13 industries connected to natural gas, 2 from biogas, 1 biodiesel, and 1 company with energy management system. So it was basically all of the units of verified carbon were sold out, let's say it by that. This is the total that you can see. There were many companies that could not participate, so the demand is higher than the offer. So this generates a better positioning of the company. We know this for the law of the offer and demand, or supply and demand. And we could have a average price that you can see here, which is depends on the dollar. You know, in Argentina, we have a situation, we have a huge inflation levels, and basically our reference, it's always the dollar. And in that moment, each ton or each unit of carbon verified units, it was $453 per ton, which this shows it's a very competitive price related to compared to other markets like renewable energies or energy efficiency, with a $226 per ton in renewable energies or 1.99 in energy efficiency. So these matters generated a movement, actions. So from this push and the interest that this generated at the local level was something very interesting. We signed agreements with the Rock Festival, which is very important in our region, which is the Cosquín Rock Festival. So they registered themselves as compensators, and they had to buy these credits, and with this money, the company that was going to receive them, instead of obtaining them, decided to make a donation to a technical school from Santa Maria de Punilla municipality, where this festival is celebrated, and this school could access to photovoltaic energies, and the students could learn about this technology and also skill up themselves. So this was a very interesting circle. And from this, of the local festivals with international relevance, they also participated in different actions. And all of this matters of the distributed generation and this paradigm shift in which the user can be also a supplier is growing in a very important way. So we can see here a solar park that is commercializing vehicles, in which the parking lots that they do, the ceilings to offer shade to the cars, they have solar panels, and they have different investors in which they obtain a share to this investment through this distributed generation. So they've generated many actions that work very well following this initiative. And it's very important for our region. We also had the opportunity to be able to give visibility to this, to go away, let's say it like that, through this climate action reserve. We participated with Mexico CO2, that's participating in the stock market of Mexico, and we started working together in the adaptation of different protocols, like the Argentina Livestock Protocol, in which different projects that use manure or also livestock waste could generate carbon credits, and then these credits could be settled in different agreements like the Climate Action Reserve. Also, this initiative drove us to be part of the founding members of the SMAC, in which we have new ways to work into the development of different regions, of greenhouse gas emissions, and also to access platforms like Climate Praise, in which we can obtain relevant information about the emissions, and at the same time, they nurture from the field information that we send through the different regions and communities. And through these inventories, we can access to new market areas. Like, for example, MRV systems, which is monitoring, reporting, and verification, and new tools like, for example, different shares on forests, on biogas, on biofuels. We're thinking about many new elements for the future. We are analyzing other new evolutions for the future to try to evolve in this pilot project and to transform ourselves in our province markets of a registry of carbon credits, in which we can register projects with maybe with a more demanding or specific data with a better traceability, and that companies not only from Cordoba but from the home region could sign up in this registry or in this database, and they can access to compensations, to offsets that may generate a local ecosystem, and that the funds and the investments can happen among the limits of our province and of our country too. Marcos, you have 1 minute to go. Okay, so it's a huge work that we are doing as technicians and engineers from the ministry. And this work is with the other ministries. Last week, we created the province cabinet of climate change, in which all of the ministries have an active role to develop all of these things. So the team with which we are working today, it's bigger with different ideas. So it's basically what we need for this to be a success. Okay, thank you very much. And I hope that you have questions.
Marcos, thanks so much for this presentation. We have a number of questions, and actually I would like to jump into the Q&A section of this webinar now. And in doing that, I will give the floor first to Binta.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Indeed, you're doing an amazing job there in Cordoba. Well done. As we are all in a learning process, I think I mentioned in my presentation that we're also exploring the possibility of tokenizing our program, Freetown to Freetown program. And I heard you mention you also use a blockchain technology called the BitLab. I was just wondering, like, how could that be applied to our model? So I wanted to understand, like, if you can just elaborate a bit on how Cordoba's approaches to the blockchain BitLab technology to ensure there is transparency and integrity in the carbon market. If you can just throw a bit of light on that.
Yes, sure. I'm not an expert in the development of the technology. For that, the government of Cordoba hired a company that is leading these developments. But basically, the tool or the platform that it was used, as I mentioned, is a blockchain platform called LACchain that the owner, it's the Inter-American Bank of Development, whose main goal is basically to generate these technological conditions to achieve improvement in life conditions, livelihood, and it's targeting all of the SDGs. So the platform is done through the BIT Lab, which is an innovation lab from this bank that I mentioned before. And what makes it easier to use this blockchain structures is that all of these verified carbon units could be stored through different codings and a system that it's developed by this company that supplied the service. And then we could access to verify or to access each of these certifications, which are non-fungible tokens. There's no possibility that they are somehow deleted or taken out of this structure due to the characteristics that the blockchain has. So in your case, I think that you should first define, I think there should be a mechanism in Africa that could supply this kind of technology or this kind of platform. These are platforms which are not very expensive. Actually, I think it was zero cost for our province. And you could maybe reach an agreement, as we did in Scale Up, in the different developments that each platform requires, because you may have your own requirements. But I could ask the Inter-American Bank of Development, and I think that maybe I could access to information to know maybe if they have a colleague, like a broader company in your region.
Marcos, muchas gracias por eso. I have a number of questions that are piling up, so I will ask you both, Binta, Marcos, but in doing so, I will give you a minute and a half each, because I want to go over a few of them. Binta, let me go back to you. And there is a question in the chat about how Freetown monitors tree growing and what is the involvement of the local community in doing so.
Okay, thank you so much, Gabriel. So community involvement and our tree tracking process, two of the things that makes us unique, sort of. So from the start, we've co-designed the Freetown Tree Time program with community members, community residents in the various communities in which we implement our project, in where we plant our trees. So we ensure that these community members are formed in a group called CBO, Community-Based Organizations, where you have list of residents with various tasks, say from planters, growers, and trackers. So the planters, of course, go and plant the trees and ensure that the growers make sure they monitor the trees' growth in terms of care and maintenance. And then we have another set that are called the trackers that ensure that these trees are tracked to monitor progress, just to see how well they're growing and record all of those into our digital platform. It's called the Green Stand. But then the tree tracking process obviously involves an app that has been developed for these trackers to ensure that all the necessary details in terms of the types of trees, the GPS coordinates are all captured and stored in our digital platform. The community members have been actively involved throughout this process to determine where to plant these trees, what types of trees they want to plant, because some of them would require some sort of like economic trees that they can sell fruits from and things like that. So they have been involved in co-designing all this process from start to where we are at the moment. So they're fully involved throughout this process, and we ensure that there's proper monitoring and evaluation work with all the workers that are within a CBO unit. So they have been involved throughout, and we ensure that there's regular monitoring and evaluation process.
Thank you, Binta. Very, very interesting. Quick questions now for both of you. Marcos,
It's Cordoba thinking about expanding or growing the system to include emissions from other sectors, like, for example, reforestation or forest conservation? It's a great question. Based on the demand, we did not have so much supply. So through this cabinet, we decided to broaden the methodologies to increase the spectrum of projects or the portfolio that can generate a bigger supply. See, this is including all of the forestry or silvostry systems, or everything that has to do with methane capture in the sanitary system. For example, we are adapting all the different protocols with other methodologies, mainly local for local projects of smaller scale, and also analyzing other kind of methodologies related to, for example, cement or concrete in low carbon, and also the injection of cryogenic CO2 produced in biofuel facilities. We are also analyzing methodologies based on other kind of materials in the biodigesters that are also going to generate displaced emissions, and everything that has to do with management of nitrogen and the other elements, and also from the displays of different emissions in the synthetic materials too.
muchas gracias, Marcos. Tengo varias preguntas. I have several questions now piling up on the chat that go from, how is the evaluation committee, Marcos? Binta, how do you ensure the additionality when it comes to issuing credits? That question, Marcos, probably is also for you too. But we don't have the time now because we are on the hour. UNDP will be collecting these questions and will place their responses. The organizers will communicate with you. I want to thank you very much, Binta, Marcos, for sharing your experiences with us. Congratulations. As I was saying, we live in a world of everything, everywhere, all at once. What you do is incredibly useful. Thanks UNDP for organizing these webinars, and we will see each other in the next event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you so much.
Binta.
Bye. Bye, Marcus. Bye.